Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Guten Morgen, Damen und Herren. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this virtual conference on the key subject of the EU Fit for 55 package. This conference is organized jointly by MEDEF and BusinessEurope under the French presidency of the EU Council. You are 750 registered participants, and you will be able to ask questions through the chat. My name is Carole Legal, and as the co-chair of the Economical and Ecological Transition Committee of MEDEF, I will moderate this event. We welcome and thank our keynote speakers and panelists who will share with us their insights on this very important set of transition tools toward a low carbon economy, and I could say a low carbon way of life. We all know that this regulatory and financial package is meant to accelerate a transition on which we all have a role to play as a producer or supplier, as a consumer, as a partner, and as a citizen. Let me hand it over to our host, Patrick Martin, Vice President of MEDEF, the French Business Association. Patrick, you are the President and CEO of a B2B company that expanded significantly under your leadership, and you have served and volunteered at MEDEF, first as President of Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes Regional Chapter, and now National Vice President since 2018. You have been for a long time committed to the MEDEF purpose, act together for responsible growth. The virtual floor is yours. A mic issue. So once again, thank you very much, Patrick. Press it. Voilà.
Once again. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Sorry
Carol.
for that.
So,
thank you, Patrick.
ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for MEDEF and for myself to meet you this morning. A special welcome to BusinessEurope, in particular to Pierre Gattaz, my friend. Welcome to the speakers, representatives of the French government, Thomas Courbe, General Director of the General Directorate for Entreprises, Economy, Finance and Recovery Ministry, to Jérôme Brouillet, Deputy Secretary General for European Affairs. A special welcome to Laurence Toubiana, CEO of European Climate Foundation. It's always a great pleasure to welcome Laurence Toubiana in your events on climate change. Also to representatives of industry, Holger Leusch, Chair of Business Europe's Industrial Affairs Committee, Deputy Director General of BDI, and Nicolas de Varin, President of UNIDEN, Union des industries utilisatrices d'énergie, Union of Energy Using Industries. Once again, welcome to Carole Legal, moderator of this debate. We need a fair and competitive transition. We, French and European companies, fully support the climate objective. We are determined to develop, produce, market, and export competitive solutions. Innovation is key to achieve these goals. Innovation and transitions needs money, a lot of money, time, and stability. We experience an unprecedented mobilization from business. Companies who choose to invest in low-carbon solutions and transform their business models will be the leaders of tomorrow. Our message is clear. We have leading companies which are recognized in this field. We have the potential to make this transformation, give us the conditions to develop solutions through massive investments in R&D and technology. The impact of Fit for 55 package is decisive for the European economy and the susceptibility of many sectors of industries and services. But if this package is not well calibrated, it can accelerate the destruction of many sectors and jobs. We have another concern about who will pay for these major transformations: consumers, companies, investors. The priority must be to strengthen French and European leadership in meeting the challenge of carbon neutrality. In addition to encouraging investments in France and in Europe, it's a lever for qualified jobs which cannot be relocated, and it creates new services, new professions everywhere in our territories. As you know, France is focused on the importance of relying on all decarbonized energies to achieve the goals of the Fit for 55 package, including nuclear and gas. MEDEF welcomes the Commission decision to recognize nuclear and gas energy in the taxonomy, but we are concerned about the restrictions, notably on the duration. We also consider that all decarbonized energy sources, including nuclear, should be part of the climate, energy, and environment state aid guidelines. We also have to face a context of a record tension on the market prices of electricity, gas, and CO2 prices. Stability and predictability of energy prices is a major component of business competitiveness. Signals sent by the retail market must be compatible with decarbonization objectives. In this context, energy efficiency actions and the use of renewable energies whose prices have demonstrated that their stability are also a lever for competitiveness. At a global level, let's have in mind that the European Union represents 8%, France less of 1% of the global emissions. It must continue to involve its global partners in a positive dynamic of commitment. This low-carbon transition must be therefore be done in a fair and competitive way without being naive. The conditions of the future EU carbon border adjustment mechanism will be decisive. They must make it possible to ensure effective implementation, to ensure fair conditions of competition for European companies. Thank you for your attention. Carole.
Thank you, Patrick, for this strong message. Next up is our keynote speaker, Thomas Courbe, General Director of the General Directorate for Enterprises of the Ministry of Economy and Finances in France. The floor is yours, Thomas.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be with you all this morning. We all know that the Fit for 55 package is fundamental in order to achieve the goals of the European Green Pact, since we need a strengthened framework, operational policies as soon as possible to accelerate the decarbonization of our economies while giving predictability to actors and in particular to companies. The French presidency's objective is to make progress on the various texts of the package while preserving the effectiveness and the global coherence of the whole package. In parallel, in the framework of the Competitiveness Council, we will continue to contribute to the debates that are very important that Patrick just mentioned, debate that began in the fall of 2021 on the industrial impacts of the package. We will be particularly attentive to the sustainability of the targets that are set in the package in order to secure the resilience of the industry. This could involve adjusting the instruments at the European level to help each sector succeed in their transformation. It also means ensuring that the principle of technological neutrality is respected. We will need all the means at our disposal to succeed, and you will not be surprised if, as Patrick, I mentioned nuclear power as an example, but there are other ones. In addition, within the European Industry Forum, we are working on the development of transition roadmaps with each of the 14 industrial ecosystems that have been defined by Thierry Breton. These roadmaps will make it possible to identify with all the stakeholders and companies in particular, the obstacles to the environmental transformation of each ecosystem and the instruments that will be necessary to overcome these obstacles. We have already set up similar initiatives in France with decarbonization roadmaps agreed upon with the most emitting sectors such as steel, aluminum, or chemical industry, and it works very well. As Patrick Martin just mentioned it, our climate objectives, far from being only cost-driven, will also offer us great opportunities for the development of new sectors such as circular economy, hydrogen, decarbonized mobility, which will create new jobs. For example, to give just one, thanks to the European industrial policy on batteries, public and private investment volumes are estimated respectively at 6 and 14 billion euros. And this strategy has enabled the emergence of a European industry of the battery, which was almost non-existent in 3 years ago. And now the EU is expected to be one of the largest production area for batteries in the world. We also understand that ETS and CBAM are points of attention and concern for MEDEF and for BusinessEurope and several companies. On ETS, among the proposals in the package, the Commission plans to revise the functioning of the carbon market with a view to reducing emissions in a cost-effective manner. The reinforcement of the targets of emission reduction in the energy and industry sector by 2030 are in line with the global package and for example, with the orientations of the French energy and climate policy. And we agree that to face this challenge, to remove disincentives to investment, we have to take some measures. One of them will be the volume of the innovation fund that could be doubled to represent as much as 60 billion euros over the period 2021 to 2030, with a broadening of the eligible sectors, in particular for transport and construction sectors, and with new tools such as carbon contracts for difference. On the other end, you know that France, before its presidency, has expressed strong reservations on the extension of ETS to road transport and construction sectors. Given the social implications involved, it will be taken into account in the discussions. On CBAM, that Patrick mentioned, we are convinced it will be an effective way to fight against carbon leakage, which has been a huge issue in Europe for the last decades. We are convinced it is compatible with the WTO rules, and we are currently discussing with member states the trajectory for phasing out free allowances in parallel to the entry into force of CBAM. We also want to give particular attention to the effects of CBAM on the competitiveness of first exports and second downstream sectors, and we want to give attention to the risks of bypassing. So the French presidency of the Union intends to make rapid progress on the discussions of these texts, in particular CBAM, within the ECOFIN Council. An initial political discussion will take place in March 2022, and it will be in accordance with, as you know, the Council's objective to implement the CBAM mechanism in 2023. We also have to maybe make a short focus on transportation and mobility, since, as you know, it's 1/3 of the emissions, the total emissions, and it is also the only sector whose emissions have continued to rise since 1990. The first tool will be the revision of the CO2 directive for vehicles. We agree it is ambitious, with in particular the objective to end the sale of combustion engines by 2035. We agree with the Commission's overall climate ambitions, and we will also remain cautious on the sustainability of these objectives for the industry, and in particular for equipment manufacturers, subcontractors, and workers in general in this automotive sector. We will also, as for the whole package, consider a possible need for additional support for these industrial players, and also to skills. To come back to the example of battery industry, we will need to requalify 800,000 battery manufacturing jobs within 3 years to support the increase in our production capacity. So skills issue and skills transformation support will be a major issue. Finally, as regards energy, we consider the draft revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, RED II, will offer a clear course by raising the overall share of renewable energy in our energy mix to 40% by 2030. At the same time, as Patrick Martin mentioned, we know how much higher energy prices are impacting the industrial sector and other economic actors. As you may have seen, the French government has made very concrete proposals, and we have issued a detailed non-paper of proposals on this issue. And we are determined during the French presidency to continue working on the energy market reform in the coming weeks and months. The current energy price crisis is confirming the need for visibility and renewed tools that we are promoting. So I would like to conclude by saying that we will strive during the French presidency to lead the discussions that will make it possible to both make progress on the package negotiation, and second, to ensure that the industrial consequences of the Fit for 55 package will be evaluated, taken into account in the negotiation of this text, that in accordance with these evaluation targets will be set in accordance with the sector's investment capacities and investment cycles, and in the end to draw a path for long-term competitiveness of European industry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas Courbe, for this introductory speech, setting the scene of the key stakes on the management of the opportunities and risks, and the substantial negotiations that are at the agenda of these coming months. Regarding the urgency to fight climate change and deliver a new model of prosperity for all, the decade to come will be the decade of action, with massive investments to be undertaken, as you said. And these massive investments require private and public sectors to share a vision of this new low-carbon prosperity and that we aim at, and in practice economical and social tools to achieve it. Mr. Holger Leusch, as Business Europe President of the Industrial Affairs Committee, the floor is now yours. What is your position on the actions that the EU needs to take to ensure a fair and competitive playing field for also with our trading partners? And in short, how to ensure that European business take the leadership in the future low carbon economy, and so that we can avoid an environmental dumping that will be harmful to everybody, for the planet and the people.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be part of this group here. Well, first of all, in a long-term vision, I think we all are very clear that the road to climate neutrality is irreversible. This is something business is supporting, and business must, can, and will play a very defining role there. On the other hand, we have to see, and we have to be realistic, that on the short and medium-term vision, we still have problems with especially with the relevant G20 countries. So we see a disbalance in climate ambition there, and this leads to the problem that on the short term, on the short track, we really have to be careful that we don't lose, that we don't deindustrialize, and this can be done by effective and efficient carbon leakage measures. This can also be done by clever support of new innovative climate neutral technologies, and of course we need an efficient and well proposed CO2 pricing. The problem within the G20, which are of the highest relevance there as our biggest competitors and of course as the biggest emitters, is that we will probably not see in every of these countries a explicit CO2 price. So we will have to come up with ideas how we can make implicit climate regulation, implicit CO2 prices, especially with the United States, for example, how we can make this comparable. So alluding a bit to the CBAM, which is going to be the biggest problem of the CBAM, how can we make implicit CO2 prices visible? So there's a lot of work to do for the governments to protect us from this disbalances on the short term. Looking at the technology issues, I mean, in the long term, the prime mover, the early mover, will have enormous chances, business-wise, technological-wise, and these we have to secure, and therefore we have to make sure that all those relevant technologies like renewable energy production, the circular economy issue, resource and energy efficiency technologies, or for example, something which is very close to me, that the hydrogen issue. All those are technologies which will make the difference. And in the long term, we are very sure they will be the better alternatives for fossil-based concepts which are used today and of course are leading to the problem we are trying to tackle. And there we need an openness for different technological aspects. We need an openness for innovation all over these sectors. And of course, we have to support the prime movers. In hydrogen, the off-taker issue is the biggest issue, because the one who is going to start with hydrogen technology today is, of course, facing challenges like price, competitiveness, and all of this. And if we solve these problems, keep Europe competitive throughout this short and middle term transformation period, then I think Europe has any chance to play a very important role in the climate neutral future we are looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Leusch. You mentioned the issue of the energy prices. So my next question will be to Laurence Toubiana, the CEO of the European Climate Foundation. Laurence, the current energy prices crisis is another example that transitions never come as an easy, smooth process, rather a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, VUCA context. So regarding the impact of energy prices on the most vulnerable people, how can we ensure that ambitious climate actions do not lead to unbearable social difficulties? What can be done at the EU level to protect and develop the European jobs and welfare? Lawrence.
Thank you for this important question. And sorry, I'm connecting from the phone because of connection difficulties. The first element, in a way, and following previous interventions, is that we probably need to look, and that of course part of the French presidency objectives, to discuss how the Fit for 55, the Green Deal implementation, can fit with the actual fiscal rules and the budgetary rules from EU, because we will need an enormous amount of public investment to ensure, at least to smooth the transition as much as possible. And as you said in your question, there is no simple way to transit to something so transformational than to go by net zero carbon emission by 2050. So it's an absolutely deep transformation on all sectors: housing, transport, agriculture, everything in a way. So first, I think it will be necessary to understand it cannot be an individual, in a way, behavior adaptation. It's about a collective effort to offer the infrastructure, for example, for clean and zero mobility, or for refitting the enormous amount of badly insulated homes all over Europe. So this means a different role for the public sector and the private sector together to allow for this infrastructure of the transition to take place, to allow the transition, one, to be possible first, and second, to give access to the citizen on zero carbon, in a way, facilities, services, goods, etc. I have, in a way, we see that now in Germany, in Netherlands, who were more on the side of really keeping the traditional philosophy, what we call the frugal countries, have been opening that discussion, and that I think it's very positive. So the problem of today's, as you mentioned, and somebody mentioned that previously, is this combination with a record inflation and the necessity to continue the transition. And I see, of course, some, in a way, interpretation or reading of the crisis, of the inflation and the electricity price crisis, as a signal that the transition is too costly or would go too fast, which in reality, of course, is not the case. The gas price as a gas price, and we know what the reason why, both on recovery and then on the geopolitics, that the gas price are causing and contributing to that inflation. But then we are elements where a survey conducted last month in France shows that 1 in 2 people sometimes fear falling into poverty because of fuel and energy prices mainly. In Spain, we have seen inflation, price increase, and the cost of living prompting large-scale demonstration of truckers, farmers, and auto workers, for example, pensioners. So the anxiety, and I think that's the main problem, the anxiety about the actual inflation may constitute an element of the perception of the public that the transition is not for them, it's not for now, it will be a problem for their well-being. So second role for the government to, and of course business actors, to show that there is a way for the transition that is beneficial for the society. And we can take a lot of examples. There have been a number of studies that can show that even in the automotive sector, where the transition will be really transformational, there is a net creation of jobs. But of course, we need the accompaniment. That's why I'm insisting so much on the role of the public sector to really to bring the collective, the citizens, the societies to that transition. In that view, I think the EU Just Transition Fund, with its 18 billion for now, seems to me very limited given the enormous amount of the change. So there are good examples of specific management, thinking, for example, at the management of Spain, the 250 million spent on mining communities who had really allowed to have a support from these communities for the change, the closing mines in particular, and the closing of the coal-based power plants, with reskilling program for green industry, etc. But of course, we need a social buffer for the prices of electricity, and I see, of course, every government struggling with that. I do think the message is to be the independence of the energy security, the need to be more independent from the international markets. We know the volatility of these markets. So the transformation of the transition, if we add that to the problem of the supply chains and the volatility of the global markets, I think we are really, in a way, adding difficulties to the transition, which, as you said, is never simple and never linear. So I do think the role of the government, the role of the state, the combination of the action of the government with the private sector is essential to really draw the plan for the transition and really understand and anticipate, at least if possible, the crisis and how it affects the poorest household, where I think the social policy should be more directed to. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Laurence Toubiana. Thank you very much. Nicolas Devaren, as president of Uniden, you represent the French energy-intensive companies struggling right now to remain competitive in a VUCA energy transition era. The transformation toward low-carbon energy requires massive investment in low-carbon energy, in renewable energy. What do you see as the main bottlenecks to the expansion of renewables, and how can we address it?
Good morning, everyone. Factor. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Yes, thank you very much. About the competitiveness and the way to achieve our common targets about carbon neutrality in 2050 and the 5 targets, we must recognize today, due to the present unprecedented energy crisis, that presumably the energy factor on the supply side has been significantly underestimated in the Fit for 55 design and build up along the past years. And we are now, as you can see, the present crisis, which is really unprecedented, in a very painful wake-up, I would say, for not only for the energy-intensive industries, which I represent, I would say for the industry at large. Competitiveness, as you know, is a multifactorial. It implies first to have a competitive access to raw materials and energy. It's no longer the case. And we can be afraid that it's going to be the case in Europe for, let's say, several years. The challenge we have to face concerning the decarbonization of the industry, especially in the next 10 years, in the next 8 years, to put it, in order to reach the -55 target, is an incredible challenge for all our industries in Europe. The amount of investment requested, I just take the figures from your excellent Olga paper on the pathways to 2.0, identified a request of investment in Germany of exceeding 870 billion euro in 8 years. So it's going to be the same in the same ratio for France. We have to face in terms of global investment, not only for the industry, presumably in the range of 300 to 400 billion euros. And for the industry itself, it's going to be in the range of 100 and 150 billion euros of capital expenditures in the coming challenge is absolutely massive. And so this needs, of course, I would say a clear signal from the markets, of energy markets especially, clear support from the authorities, I would say an harmonized legal and financial framework. And these are the main conditions for the time being, but I will come later on the conditions.
Back to you, Holger Lösch. The issue of energy transition is also very big in Germany. What is your view of the role of gas? Targeted energy mix in 2030?
I understood only half of the question, but I think I can add the missing parts. Well, of course, we all know every member state has its own energy mix, and the European Union decided that this decision about the national energy mix will stay in the authority of the respective of the member states. We all know that some parts of Europe are relying heavily on burning coal, burning gas. I mean, coal is clearly on the exit. On the other hand, renewables are on the rise, and this applies for Germany. But in our study, which was already mentioned, we said, okay, we have a transition issue there as well. So we will build a lot of renewable energy capacities in Germany and in other parts of Europe. But this will not be sufficient by 2030 to provide the necessary electricity supply we need at any time, at any hour, at any second. And therefore, our concept, and this is, of course, being approved by the government as well, and all the other relevant studies which have been done on that, for the transition, we need sort of gas power plants, which will then go into work when the renewables cannot deliver as they should to maintain the level of security of supply we need. And of course, it's not about burning fossil fuel gas until 2100. Of course, these gas turbines will have to become or have to use green gas over time, and at least from 2045 for Germany on, they will have to use green gas. But until we are going there, we need to build a great number of new gas power plants, and we are talking in our study about 43 gigawatt of capacity, which has to be added until 2030. Today, Germany, just to give you an impression, Germany today has 31 gigawatt of gas turbine capacity. This year, we're going out of nuclear finally, and the government plans are going out of coal by 2030 already. So we need something, and this is why we have this. Well, from my perspective, a bit odd discussion on the taxonomy. I mean, fossil gas definitely is not sustainable, but you need it for a transition. And so the question is, how can we deal with that? On the other hand, I'm not supporting the discussion to teach other countries which kind of energy mix they should use. So this is maybe a part of a political special interest debate in Germany. We will need any form of non-CO2 emitting energy in Europe to come and meet our targets. So, well, I know it's difficult to understand, but we have really to look at facts and not at, well, questions of belief or not belief.
Let's be pragmatic and operational to succeed in this transition to low carbon economy for sure. I have a question from the chat coming from Kati Ruomaki from the Finnish Industries. In your opinion, is the current design of Europe's energy markets fit for the purpose of decarbonization, and how can we best ensure its further integration? So that's a question you partly answered, I think, Holger. Maybe also I can go back to you, Nicolas de Varenne.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Undoubtedly, the present energy market, especially for power, I'm speaking of the power market, the present design of the power market in Europe doesn't fit with the long-term signal we do require to decarbonize our industry. The market is efficient. The power market in Europe is presently efficient for short-term signal. This has been built in the past years, especially when in 2019 reformed the design market. But it's no longer effective to give us the long-term signal we require in order to invest in decarbonation. That's very clear. The present crisis gives, unfortunately, the demonstration of the inefficiency of this signal. So that's for sure. We need definitely to consider a reform, an in-depth reform of the growth market for power in Europe. So this France has put a paper on the table, which has been started to be discussed last Saturday in Amiens. That is a significant first move. The debate is complex because we are speaking of, let's say, economic law and not a legal one. But for sure, we do need those long-term signals. And as long as we not get them, we will remain the main risk today because of the energy crisis, that the decarbonation of industry is at risk. Who will decide a significant new investment in hydrogen or in a decarbonized process in the moment with such uncertainties on prices? And the prices are going to remain, presumably the power prices are going to remain fairly high in the coming years. So those signals, long-term signals, is absolute necessity. And I think this must be recognized. That is not going to say that the short-term signals are not efficient, but we do need long-term signal in order to invest. Otherwise, investors will decide to make those huge investments outside of Europe.
Thank you, Nicolas. Holger Lösch, do you want to add something or on this typical issues?
It's always very easy to say, okay, the market is failing. But I don't think the market is failing, that the market is doing what it does. There is a scarcity, prices rise. And so the reason for these results we are seeing now are probably much deeper than the market design. On the other hand, we all know that working on an internal energy market for the EU has been going on for years, and this should be really treated with a high priority. We need more facility to trade within this market, and of course, if you're looking at the perspectives we have with renewables in countries like Spain, Portugal, who are looking at kilowatt-hour prices for renewable energy of €1. I mean, that's highly competitive. And so the only problem is, how do we get it to the rest of Europe? So we need, especially looking at hydrogen and looking at green electricity, we need a new design of the energy infrastructure in Europe. So the European copper plate, as call it the big vision, of course, would be perfect. I don't think that's feasible, but we need to look at pipelines. We need to look at harbors. So there is a lot of work to be done. Europe has a high potential, especially if you're looking at offshore, but offshore wind in the Baltic Sea and in the North Sea. But if you look at photovoltaic in the more southern parts of Europe, so there's a huge potential. The only thing is we have to get it going, and we have to connect the dots to make it to make it a real European system. Well, that's easy said. That's a huge task, but I think we should pay a lot of attention to make this a bit more a European energy market.
So my next question will be to Mr. Jérôme Brouillet. Mr. Jérôme Brouillet, you are the Deputy Secretary General for European Affairs in France, so you will be at the heart of the coming the negotiations. So what will the presidency do to maintain the consistency in the package? What are today the emerging points of convergence or divergence among the EU members on these very important issues?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. I think, as you said, it's a huge package. First, there are many texts, 12 texts, and those texts are negotiated in many configurations. We have some texts that are negotiated by the environment ministers, some by the energy ministers, some by the transport ministers, and we also have some text in the ECOFIN. So that's for the ministers that are really involved in the negotiation and responsible at the end of the day for the position of the Council. But as Thomas said, all the Council formation are also interested in the package because it has a huge impact on the whole part of the economy. And so the competitiveness ministers already discussed the issues and the impact of the package as a whole on the industry and are keen to continue following the discussion and ensure that we find a proper way to reach our objectives and also while preserving the competitiveness of the European industry. It's the same, of course, for the agriculture ministers. There are some rules regarding forestry, for example, and the agriculture ministers are very keen to be involved in those discussions. So it's a difficult task for the presidency of the Council to maintain the coherence of the package. I think what we think is first, what we see maybe is that there is a strong will from the member states to maintain the package and to negotiate the texts as a whole. We have seen that at the end of the Slovenian presidency, that has asked the member states if they were ready to front load some part of the package, and that was not the case. And what we heard in Amiens on Friday from Commissioner Vice President Timmermans was the same. The Vice President asked the Council to maintain the coherence of the package because there is an issue of ambition, and if we want to have to reach the objective of 55% reduction of emission, we need to consider the text as a package. That said, what will we do to advance the negotiation? I think, and maybe as part of the Prime Minister office, we will be very, we will discuss the issues at stake in the council in the different council formation in order for the ministers to be involved in the discussion. And maybe second, what we wanted to do, and that's what we did last week, was to kick off very soon the political discussion. And so we did it in Amiens with environment and energy minister together, because we think maybe the main sticking points of the package are in the remit of the energy and environment ministers. And we had a very good discussion with the Vice President Timmermans on the way forward on this package, and we are confident we will find a general approach in the Council during our presidency.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Brouillet. We are having questions from the chat, so I can jump to these questions if it's okay. We have a question from Philippe Chauveau from Solvay, saying industry exports are vital for European business and jobs. Free allocations have proven helpful to manage leakage impacts of the EU ETS. What do you think of the lack of adjustment for exports in the new mechanism proposed by the Commission for adjusting carbon at the borders of the Union? Light on that question?
Who?
Jerome Brouillet?
Yes, thank you. And sorry, we didn't hear the end of the sentence. Maybe on that, it's indeed a very strong issue in the Council, mounting issues of the protection of industrial exports. There will be discussion in the Council about the right way to protect our industry. What the Commission think is that if we want the CBAM to be WTO compatible, we need to have less free allowances in the ETS for the sectors covered by CBAM. But we also hear from some member states that they are not convinced and they want to explore other ways to protect industrial exports. So we are engaging in this conversation in the Council. And as Thomas said, I think we will have this discussion at the political level in March in the ECOFIN.
React on that, Carol?
Sure.
Yes, I think the point raised by the question is absolutely critical. Free allocation within the ETS system is absolutely necessary for the industry. The major risk with CBAM is the CBAM to be a political success or diplomatic success and an economic failure. There is a big risk of circumvention of CBAM mechanism. CBAM is going to be complex, so the implementation measures are going to be extremely critical. And the risk of not illegal circumvention, of course, but a lot of legal circumvention, that is to say, from third parties, third state, claiming for an equivalent treatment and recognizing that they have also decarbonized industries, exporting industries. And though we would suggest to have a sort of standstill clause in the implementation of the decrease of free allocation. There is presently a transitional period, which I think is 2 years, and we suggest to add on top of this transitional period, let's say a wait-and-see clause, standstill clause of maybe 5 years, for instance, in order to check the effectiveness of the CBAM mechanism. It's very important not to lose the competitiveness aspect of the free allocations. Presently, the present ETS design proposed by the Commission, the decrease of free allocation is going to be extremely significant in the decade due to the revision of benchmarks, due to the baseline, and so on and so on. So there are many factors. The free allocations are going to decrease very significantly. We would put the industry at risk if we had on top of that a faster decrease of free allocation versus CBAM.
If I may. Do you
All
hear
right.
me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
I think, of course, this discussion is very important. We should remind us that, of course, the leakage, the carbon leakage has been prevented by, for the moment, the free allowances for a number of industrial sectors. At the same time, we have seen that the emission of these sectors finally have not been really reducing. And now the timeline and the agenda is now going, well, we have to accelerate the path of decarbonization. So we need a price signal. That's, of course, quite evident. But I understand the point that we may be careful that we implement CBAM in a way that well, do the job, meaning ensures that there is no carbon leakage. On the other side, when you look at finally, and I don't think it's only a diplomatic exercise, you see that finally this opening the discussion on CBAM has opened a lot of discussion in many countries on putting a carbon price. Even for the moment, there is no comparison between the level of the ETS today and some other carbon price elsewhere. But I do think this is really, from the international point of view, I'm normally witnessing, it has had a positive impact on how serious finally EU is starting, in a way, deepening even its transition, accelerating the emission reduction, and that CBAM is, for the moment, can have really a deterrent effect element. On the other side, it's good that, and because to be WTO compatible, we really need to decarbonize our export as well. And this price system, internally and externally, is not the only one. We have the standards element as well in the EU regulation, both from imports and from the internal market. So I would say I understand the concern of, in a way, the efficiency of the CBAM, and certainly, but there are many clauses and many elements in the EU regulations that we can witness if finally the competition is fair, and that has been used in the past. So I think we need that move. It's quite difficult to explain it diplomatically. There is a problem of the income out of the CBAM, but I must say it has had a positive impact on the seriousness of the climate policies that other countries are considering.
If I may, but the one thing we have to add here, so in reality, we have largened the gap in ambition by going to 55. So the gap and the risk of carbon leakage has been rising through this decision. So we have to take this into consideration. And in the short term, well, of course, we see all the discussions. We see the Chinese discussions. We see every other discussion, and we see a lot of interest in very fossil countries to switch to the more green technologies. And this is, of course, something which is fostered by our demand for green energy. I mean, looking at Australia, having a huge project with Australia on a hydrogen partnership. So they are all thinking about this. They are all going first steps. But the problem, and I will stay with this, is the short-term issue. On the short term, the competitiveness is going to suffer. And the question is how we get through this valley of death, if you want, or death valley of the short-term transition. And this is something we really have to put forces together to find interesting ideas. One word to CBAM. I've been involved in some think tank processes in Brussels on CBAM. Well, I'm not a scientist. I'm not even an economist. But I think this is way too complex, way too complicated. I am very sure this is not gonna work in a real approach. It works, of course, as a diplomatic sign, but looking at the exports, I mean, importing steel, you can perhaps put a price on that. But what is made out of steel? What are European companies exporting? This is not, we are not importing steel and then exporting steel. So we are exporting very complex products, which are made up of a lot of materials and a lot of technologies. And I'm definitely sure that this is going to overwhelm any instrument like CBAM to come up with ideas how you can judge the impact of CO2 price on exported products. So we need something which is it's easier then. And if you look at the formulas inside the proposal for the CBAM, I mean, this looks like the relativity theory of Einstein. If you look at it, I think this is way too complex for use in reality. And one last point, I mentioned the question of explicit and implicit CO2 prices. This is a major challenge. How can we judge the level of ambition apart from a real explicit CO2 price like Europe has it, to be honest, for about 11,000 companies?
No, on this, I agree very much with Olga on the difficulty of using both implicit and explicit carbon prices. It can be really a very, very complex setting.
Yeah, just a reaction on Laurent's comment. Industry has reduced its emission of 40% over the last decades, which is not the case, of course, of neither transportation or housing. So industry made the job about decarbonization. About the price signal, the famous price signal coming from the CO2. Let's consider that the price of CO2 on the ETS market has been multiplied by nearly 4 in less than a year. The price moved from 20 euro per ton of CO2 up to 75 or 80 or even 85 presently. That is to say, the price of CO2 is now 10 years in advance of the impact assessment made by the Commission last July. So this market is undoubtedly under the pressure of speculation. And this is not providing direct signal. We are, with such a huge increase of CO2, is impacting, of course, the cost and the cost of decarbonization. So the signal doesn't work. This signal of the market doesn't work. And so that is to say the ETS market does need a significant reform, does need, everything has been put in place in order to reduce the number of allocation in circulation in the market through the MSR and other mechanisms. That is in place. Now the price is set as this. And this has been done mainly by the financial investors which have rushed in this market, seeing exciting opportunities of getting monies. This is detrimental to the industry, definitely. So this signal doesn't work. We must recognize that. Let's see the agendas. The agendas are driven by political decision, which is a good thing. Take the coal exit in Germany is not driven by the price of CO2. It's driven by the political decision, a political consensus which has been built in Germany in order to exit the coal in the coming, let's say, before 2035 or 2038, et cetera, et cetera. So we have really to think about a redesign of the ETS. Fortunately, the present reform of the ETS directive is far to reach the on that. So we ask for this.
Thank you, Laurence, Holger, and Nicola, for this very topic on prices. In a transforming world, these volatile prices are tools to manage, but still tools. But they are not the only one, as you said. There are all. I have a question by Kay Lucke from a German auto supplier. Asking question on social acceptance and industrial transformation. He says, I assume neither the EU nor finance minister will have the funds to achieve these targets handing out money. Would it not be smarter and necessary to consider these targets already in designing regulations? So I think he points to mention there are a lot of different tools to achieve our targets. Question is that he is looking for good examples of to build social acceptance and industrial transformation. Timing of have examples of good regulation with perfect timing to succeed.
If I may, I will raise the point of the electric vehicle and the incredible revolution that the automotive industry in Europe has to address in the next decade. As you can see, every day there is an announcement of OEMs of a switch to integral electric vehicle. It is going to be an exceptional challenge for the, it's already an exceptional challenge for the automotive industry. Very exciting to some respect, because Europe, as it were to say, and I would say the race for battery, for instance, is far to be lost. I would say, on the contrary, Europe, Germany, France, and all the European countries are investing massively in gigafactories. We are on the top of the research on batteries, a new generation of batteries, solid state batteries, and so on and so on. So this is extremely exciting, and we have all the resources in terms of R&D, in terms of innovation. We have also the public support and the legal framework which is going to support that. But on the reverse, it's very clear that it's going to impact on the social impact is going to be extremely heavy to switch from the thermic manufacturing facilities to the new electric ones. I think a study has been made on that by the automotive value chain, which is said that roughly 300,000 jobs will disappear due to the value chain due to this switch. That is a clear explanation of the incredible speed of this change. I think we will succeed. Europe will succeed in doing so, but it's undoubtedly a major challenge for the authorities and for the companies as well, I think.
An integrated sectorial approach is Laurence or Holger, do you want to complement?
I think on this element, it's a really very, very good and pressing example of how to anticipate now a technology shift we are seeing happening, and could be, of course, has to be beneficial, because as I think Nicolas said, of course, the bulk of emissions still is in transport and housing. So it's important to succeed in that. And now there are now many studies showing that, yes, the actual value chain in automotive sector will lose jobs, but there are as well opportunities if, of course, the transition is well organized, and again, that there is state aid in a way well organized too, that the reskilling of the workers can, at the end of the day, in the just transition scenario, could create much more jobs than actually it's the case. So it's interesting, because we have had in the past, of course, this major shift, for example, in France, from the steel industry. We see, of course, when the transition is not managed over a long time, you pay the price for really long time crisis for, in particular, some territories. So I think that's a very interesting moment where, if everybody join forces, of course, the labor unions, of course, the companies, the business themselves, and the public sector, to in a way discuss the transition plan, which accompanies the reskilling of the workers, addressing the specific local issues, because again, it's companies in territories and with specific activities. And I think that the Boston Consulting Group for my foundation did a number of studies in different countries of Europe, of course, value chains of automotives across Europe. And finally, the result was was positive in every country, if, of course, all the workers could be reskilled for the battery industry, the charging infrastructure, etc. But it needs a plan, and that, of course, not normally the way things are working, and that's why this challenge is huge.
Thank you, Laurence.
Yeah.
Holger, what is key to take the best of these opportunities in green tech?
Well, first of all, we all have to be aware. I mean, change is integral to industrial development. If we would not have changed and developed in industry, we probably still would work in steam power, in steam plants, and whatever. So we have to consider there will be considerable change in industries over the next decades. And this would have been with or without climate protection necessary. So this is the first thing. Then the second thing is Of course, I mean, governments have a limited toolbox. They can do pricing, they can do subsidizing, and then they can rule. And this is what governments can do. But putting these tools from this very limited toolbox together in the most intelligent way is the real challenge government has to say. I mean, CBAM is a splendid idea. Making others pay if they don't play or comply with our idea of climate protection. The question is, how can we make it a part of this toolbox in combination with others like free allocation, subsidies, rules, and pricing like the ETS. So it's all a question of how you put the toolbox together. And last word on jobs. I mean, we are working very closely with our labor unions, and to be honest, industry jobs are, well, probably the most sought after and best paid and most solid jobs we have in Europe. So I'm absolutely agreeing that jobs in industry are going to change. People are probably not going to work so much on combustion engines by 2050 than on electrical cars. But I would like them to work in industry where they're well paid, where they have good contracts and safe contracts. If you and Laurence, sorry about that. So I'm working with Boston Consulting very close as well. But this idea that having people employed in charging e-scooters, I don't think that's a comparable employment, comparable to a good industry job. So we should be very, very cautious not to replace very good industry jobs by service jobs which are less secure, less paid, and give less perspective and have less complexity for the workers. So this is just a reminder. You cannot count service job versus industry jobs, not easily, I think.
No, I agree very much with you, Olga. That was my concern about the study, by the way. And I do think this, the quality of the jobs, are, if we want really the transition to be just, is absolutely central. So I totally take your point. We don't have only to look at the number of jobs, which is, of course, currently the way consulting firms produce their results. Meaning it's not a total loss in job, but I totally agree how not only, of course, quality job, but as well the capacity to organize. We see in some now new companies and new sector difficulty for the labor union to work. And so again, just to support your point that the quality of the job is really important. And in particular, of course, Germany is a very good example of that.
Maybe if I may, just a few remarks on that. I think there are two different issues. The first is for consumers that are confronted with lock-in effects, especially with automotive. And the second one is employees. And there are different tools that are discussed. We have European tools that are quite effective. For the employees, we have the Just Transition Fund. For the consumers, there is this idea of the Commission to have a climate social fund. And we will see what, at the end of the day, the Council will think of this idea. But clearly, it was at the center of the discussion in Amiens. The way to help the consumers that are locked in with poor automotives, for example. The second one, and Laurence mentioned that, is fiscal rules. We have seen that the German position on that has changed, especially with the new coalition. And I think it's a debate that will begin during the French presidency and that will go on with our Czech colleagues. And the last one, and it was the one that Olga and Laurence mentioned, is is the employment impact and how to reskill workers and ensure that there is a shift in jobs that does not conduct to poor quality job, but good jobs. And I think on that issue, there is the responsibility lies also in the remit of the social partners. And I think it will be a very interesting point to address during the social summit in March. And we expect the social partners to come with new ideas on that. And also the employment ministers will discuss these issues of the transition with the social partners in Bordeaux next month. So I really think we have to find a way to have a just transition. It was our idea in Amiens, the discussion we had, and Laurence mentioned that also. Really the key for the success of the Fit for 55 is to find a way to ensure a just transition towards 55%.
Did we lost you, Carole?
I think we are on our own now.
Oh, it seems to. We are just feeling lonely, abandoned. If we, Olga, because as you are in this, I understood that there is really a very strong discussion in the labor unions in Germany, because some of the new companies, well, that was of course a discussion on Tesla and others, in a way prevent workers to be organized. And when you look at the industrial system in Germany, the fact that this combination of really governance and in a way discussion, negotiation between, of course, powerful trade unions and the industry leaders were particularly fruitful. And how to prevent that, which I totally agree with you, how to prevent that finally there is a loss of the quality even in the relation between the businesses and the employee.
Yeah, well, I can tell you when we were negotiating the coal exit, and I was negotiating this for BDI in the coal commission, and then at one point the head of one of the most influential labor unions, he really cried out in the commission and said, well, our people want industry jobs, they do not want to work in a tattoo parlor. And this was in a nutshell the problem the labor unions of course see, because of course, the power of the labor unions in Germany comes especially from the industry jobs. So those are the most powerful unions because they have the most money, the most members, and the highest degree of organization. And what they are fighting against is, and this is something we do not. We are not in conflict with them on that, because as industry, they fighting the tendency, especially in all of these startup communities, to really exploit people, tell them this is the greatest job on earth, but no social security on a good level, low wages, and always the promise, okay, one day we are going to be a unicorn and then you're all rich, and this is something which is they see in parts of the PV and especially in the PV sector this was a problem, and in all of these more service driven companies which are starting up wherever you look, and holding up a sustainable badge. And so this is something we really should keep in our eyes. I mean, being sustainable or doing sustainable things, sustainable is ecological, social, and economic. So you cannot just say it's ecological what we do, and therefore we do not need to be social. And so this is the conflict we are seeing. But it's not a hot conflict, but it's a subliminal conflict.
Can I just, sorry, jump in? Alexandre Affre from BusinessEurope. There seems to be a technical problem. So we have lost Paris. I think they are working on this to fix the problem. So we keep hearing your discussion, Holger and Laurence. I think the participants also hear your discussion.
Yes.
So I think it's an interesting one, which you can maybe continue. And when they fix in Paris, they will take the moderation back. But just be aware that I think the audience is hearing your discussion. And when it's fixed in Paris, they will let us know. So
Okay.
Laurence, I think you wanted to react again on what Holger was saying. I suggest you do.
Absolutely. I think it's, of course, I know, of course, the typical, well, the German discussion, which I think Olga characterized very well. In France is there too. And probably there is a discussion at European level. Again, the social rules are, given to each country to define. And of course, there is no prospect for the short term of having an harmonization of everything. But I think it's an interesting discussion because, again, of course, as you know, my point of view is we have to accelerate the transition as much as we can. And of course, I'm frightened by the timeline. And even if I know, of course, Europe is a small contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions, but a strong norm setter for what can happen. So it's really important what's happening in Europe with the package. Even, of course, it's more ambitious than before. So I think there is an element of the social policies that should be discussed, in my view, at European level to prevent, to really have the citizen together with the transition and not opposing them because they are afraid of paying the price in terms of the quality of their job or even their employment, or yes, access to goods and services that doesn't become too expensive for them. And I think it's so the social policy becomes to be very, very central in the package, in my view.
Well, I mean, the general question is, I mean, this transition would be much easier if we would look at a more balanced global level playing field. And with global, I do not mean 190 countries. I mean the G20. The G20 are emitting about 80% of everything. They are responsible for about 80% of the global GDP. So this is the circle of companies which could make the difference. And the other thing, what I see, no country, no continent can pay itself fiscally out of this issue. So if we would have a more balanced playing field, the competition of technologies would be something which really would make for a good competition. And therefore, sometimes I have the impression that we look too much on the German CO2 emissions in an isolated way. We are looking too much on Europe as an island. So what we should do is really put much more emphasis in developing technologies, making them really convincing business models, and bringing others into the game. So for me, it's always said it's a global problem. We can only solve it globally. But sometimes I feel that we pay not enough attention to make these technologies attractive for other countries.
No, you're right, because I think the power of EU is a major, or the major still, a global market. And so the norms and the technology developed there can have an enormous influence on others, and we see that on all sectors. But yes, the problem of really bringing the others together and maybe investing more time and resources to bring them together in the same line is certainly a top priority. And we see that now, which is positive, in my view, on the combination on public and private capital to help countries. I'm thinking about of what is happening now in South Africa, with the support to get out of coal as soon as possible, or something similar we could do with other emerging countries that has to accelerate the transition. And of course, there is a big question of China and how the decision China will go in what direction, and in particular on what speed. So yeah, it's a complex diplomatic and, in a way, investment, anything exercise. But we don't have a lot of choice, no, but to try to do it as hard as we can.
I'm jumping. Sorry, I'm jumping again in the discussion. So this is again Alexandre from BusinessEurope. It seems that the technical problem cannot be solved. So we cannot reconnect with Paris. But again, I confirm the participants were listening to your conversation, Holger and Laurence, and thank you very much, because I think it was an interesting one. It is an interesting one. I'm sure you can continue for a long time. But we are actually coming to an end, and I would like to maybe ask and also give a possibility then for Mr. Brouillet to have a final comment, but basically ask a final question to the three of you again, because I understand we cannot reconnect with Paris, so I cannot bring in Mr. De Varenne. But so to you, Laurence, Holger, and Jérôme, a final question to close the event would be, what will be the most important elements of the package and of the Fit for 55 files to get right over the coming months? So really simple question and simple and short answer by each of you, please. And I start with you, Laurence.
Well, for me, is as Jérôme mentioned, the consistency, because it has to be something that everyone does. It's not one sector in particular, because there is so much interconnection. So I would say consistency, that everyone advance with the same speed if possible, and with, of course, understanding the interconnectedness of all these policies, which is really a fantastic revolution, by the way, we are entering in.
You will hear us now?
Yes, we can hear you, Paris.
Oh, fortunately, we have been a little bit frustrated, but now we take the best of your exchanges, very interesting exchanges, but we can conclude as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so Carole, maybe I give you heard about where we are. Maybe I give you the final word, and there is still Holger, Jérôme, and Mr. De Varenne to give the answer to the final questions. But back to you, Carole.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, for having jumped in and thank you to you all for the very important and interesting conversation. And so as Alexander said, now as we are wrapping up, we're looking for in a few words, to share with us what is the most important achievements that you are working for or hoping to get in the coming months regarding the Fit for 55 package. And I didn't hear if, Holger, you already answered, or this is your floor now?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, I would take one word that Laurent said. It's consistency. Coherence is extremely important. And of course, we have to be flexible in meeting all of these negative impacts which could happen in the short term, without losing the perspective of the chances we have in the mid and long term. I think this is the dilemma we are in. It's going to be tough. I mean, Bill Gates said this is zero is no alternative, or there's no alternative to zero, but it's going to be extremely tough. And I think we have to overcome these tough periods to have the effects we want, and this is something I would wish from this package: consistent, coherent, realistic, and flexible.
Thank you, Holger. Laurence?
I took my time already, so it's good to leave.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you. The time that we reconnected, and thank you, Nicolas.
Yes, competitive industry is of course multifactorial. We have R&D, we have innovation capabilities, we have the skills, we convert them, so no doubt. We'll have the financing, thanks to the taxonomy and the comprehensive taxonomy. We'll have the financing for that. We do need competitive access to raw materials and energy. And on this last point, of course, there is a big problem for the time being. This implies, for instance, France is contributing heavily to the decarbonation of the energy mix in Europe. Just remind you that presently France is decarbonized at 93% thanks to the nuclear, hydroelectricity, and renewable. And it's going to be the case, and France will continue with, thanks to the new nuclear incoming in the next decade, to the decarbonation of energy supply, power supply in Europe. So my point is that definitely we need to go through the present deep, huge crisis we are facing, which is really a big challenge for Fit for 55, in my opinion. It's not purely a conjunctural crisis. It's going to have some structural aspects. And this implies a vigorous reform of the energy market in order to get the long-term signal for investment in the future of our industry.
Thank you, Nicolas. And Jérôme, you are the heart of the negotiation right now.
Yes, thank you. I think I will be very short. I think at the end of the day, what we want is the ambition to be preserved. So it may be the same idea as one as Laurence and Olga said, is to have consistency, and that with all the text we reach our objective of a reduction of at least 55%. And I think it will be our objective for the next 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much to each of you, and thank you to the audience. Sorry for the technical problems we just had recently. Our common mobilization in the upcoming months are key to make the planet great again, and to position the EU as the leader of the low-carbon economy, and to position the EU to be the best place in the world to share a low-carbon prosperity. So thank you again to each of you, and let's work together for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.